No, but what I did wonder is if there was something at this point, now that it's your book and
Hmm.
Tanya got her own, she had her say. If there was
Hmm.
something in this book that she didn't care for, did she still get to weigh in and say, hey, we should change this so it's a little bit more true to our partnership, or it just never came up?
Never came up. Yeah, no, that never came up.
Gotcha. So, do you think that you and Tanya will write a fourth book or maybe a new series together? Or are you going to be branching off and working on your own for a while? What's the plan?
Oh, I that's a good question. I think that we will always work together in some capacity. I don't know if we'll ever work together like this again, but I think we will continue to work together kind of behind the scenes. So that's been what's developed since Zora and Me, is that we've continued to kind of work together in publishing, but in different capacities.
Well, I mean, presumably, if for no other reason, just to continue to promote the series.
Oh yes, that's I know
Building
that's
some
kind
fun
of
things
I
together.
know. All right, and that's for me. Like I'm not even thinking of that. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. But yeah, I just think of all this other random work stuff that comes up for us all.
Well, I mean, it's possible that like Stephen King and Peter Straub started hating each other back in the '80s, but by God, they've got another book in that series coming up. The Bleak House, I can't remember. Somebody's shouting at me. Lamar Giles is shouting at me because
Mhm.
he's a huge Stephen King fan. Um,
Well, as
I
well,
can't remember the name of the first book.
well, I am also a huge Stephen King fan, and I
What's
guess
the
it
book
was,
then? The Talisman. Oh my God. Whew.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
So
was gonna lie awake all night trying to think of what the title of that. I was gonna Google it, but it was gonna bother me that I couldn't
well,
remember.
there are so many, and it gets hard to tell when you read which one and what happened. And yeah, so but I'm with you there. I've been a big fan for a while. And The Summoner, I couldn't have written this book if I hadn't read Pet Cemetery, actually. Pet Cemetery kind of got me through a rough patch, and working on the manuscript. So,
When did you read Pet Cemetery originally? Then
gosh, while I was writing this book,
for the first time?
yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
think, because it really got me because my son was 2 years old and we lived in a busy neighborhood full of deliveries and trucks. And my son was just learning how to walk and crossing the street. And, so it got me in that parent place of danger and vigilance. Um, yeah. But I read the book because I was interested in the story of resurrection, and kind of the psychology of resurrection. And so that's why I was like, yeah, maybe I should read Pet Cemetery, and I did, and it was an enormous help.
I read that one on a. I'm going to date myself on a Habitat for Humanity missions trip with my church group when I was all of I think 13 or 14, and it was the most rebellious thing I could have done because they were all reading their Bibles and I had my Stephen King, and the parents were looking at each other and looking at me, and I couldn't very well whip out a pack of cigarettes,
Uh-huh.
not at that age, but that book about the same amount of reaction from the adults as if I had whipped out cigarettes.
Oh,
So I loved
wow.
it mostly for that. I read it again as an
Yeah.
adult, yes, as a parent.
Hmm.
Uh, Random anecdote. What other than Pet Cemetery? What other inspirational text did you draw from for the series and for the Summoner?
So for the whole series, Zora Neale Hurston's autobiography, Death Tracks on the Road, I think is kind of a key work. And for us, it's really like the first like 15 pages. That's all she really gives to her childhood, which is amazing for fiction writers because you have a little bit that you can really just like explode. So it's not so much that it overwhelms your imagination, but it's just enough that kind of is able to kind of turn the knob to kind of explore a lot of different stuff in these books. the key Zora book for the Summoner was actually Zora's first novel, Jonah's Gourdvine, which is really about her parents and about her father, who in real life and at the end of that novel dies in a car accident. So that was something I kept in mind when I was working on the Summoner, thinking about the horseless, the cars, like this new invention that everyone wants and some people have. So I always kept that in mind, that John Hurston will die in a car accident. So that book.
You are very focused on the death of her parents.
Yes, I have been. The other thing, actually, that really stayed with me, well, I guess two things related to the zombie piece of this. So the real Zora Neale Hurston photographed this woman in 1936 in Haiti who was believed to be a zombie. She had been buried in 1917 by her family, and this woman reappears in 1936, and she hardly speaks. She's physically very changed, but her family confirms that it is her. And this woman had been hospitalized. Her name was Felicia, and someone calls up Zora Neale Hurston and says, look, there's a real zombie, at this hospital. You should go see her. And Zora does go, and she takes this photograph of this kind of this woman that's clearly been broken by whatever experiences she's had between the time she died and the time she resurfaced. So that was something that also really stayed with me. And Zora documented that and kind of talks about her experiences with voodoo in a book called Tell My Horse. So that was one key that I was kind of weaving in and thinking through in the Summoner. Another thing, kind of totally unrelated, I'm a big fan of poetry. I love romantic poetry. My son is named Keats for John Keats. And there is a fragment of John Keats's about a hand, and this hand is warm with life. And if it were to die, it can, come at you. Would you reanimate this hand with life? That's kind of the gist of the fragment. And that was like a weird kind of like zombie moment in romantic poetry. And I just kept thinking of John Keats's hand. And that got into the book with Carrie, who is the narrator of all three novels, having this hand injury, from doing laundry and whatnot. So when Carrie's hand is hurt, the author is thinking of John Keats's hand from this fragment of poetry. So those are, I think, the big influences that were at work in the book.